Today is the 13th day of the month of Teves. We are in the middle of chapter 40, discussing the laws of Netilas Yadayim, washing our hands for bread. Today we'll be going from paragraph 14 to the end of the chapter, paragraph 21. So we learned that the reason for the initial decree of Netilas Yadayim, of washing our hands before you eat bread, was because in temple times there were certain types of foods that could only be eaten in a state of ritual purity. And if our hands are ritually unclean, then if we touch food that is not allowed to become ritually unclean, then we're messing up that food. Therefore, the rabbis decreed that before having any sort of bread, whether it has to be in with ritual purity or not, we should make sure to wash our hands. That way our bases are covered. And this also applies nowadays, even though we don't have food nowadays that has to be in a ritually clean state, ritually pure state. So the question is, if the whole goal is that my hands shouldn't contaminate the food, then what about if I wear gloves? Tumah, ritual impurity, at least in this scenario, cannot pass through gloves, and therefore if I'm wearing gloves and I'm eating my bread, I shouldn't have a problem. That should be a way to get around this decree of having to wash our hands before eating bread. So the answer is that in an extreme scenario, that is allowed. In a scenario where it's extremely complicated to get water, and the person's weak, they either need to have a meal of bread that includes bread, then they could rely on this and they could just wear gloves when they eat, and therefore they're not touching the bread at all, and they'll be good to go. However, one is supposed to only rely upon this in a case of extreme necessity. If it just means they'll have to have something else for lunch, something that he doesn't like as much, or it means that he'd have to wait a little bit longer to get to a place where he can wash his hands, it's appropriate to either wait or to eat something which does not require washing your hands first. Paragraph 15. Let's say somebody goes to the bathroom, and therefore they have to wash their hands from going to the bathroom, but they also want to wash their hands for bread. What should they do? If they only wash their hands once, then there's a blessing you make after going to the bathroom called Asher Yatzar that we discussed previously, thanking God for the fact that our bodies work properly. But after you wash your hands for bread, you're supposed to immediately go and make the blessing of the bread and eat the bread. You're not supposed to have any sort of interruption between washing your hands and sitting down to eat the bread. So you're stuck in a catch-22. You can't even say, wash your hands, say the Asher Yatzar blessing, and then wash your hands again with the blessing of Ani Netilas Yadayim in preparation for eating bread, because at that point your hands are already clean. You did the mitzvah already of washing your hands. So therefore the appropriate thing to do is to wash your hands for going to the bathroom, say the blessing of Asher Yatzar, then we touch an uncovered part of our body. It could be above our elbow, it could be scratching beneath our socks, it could be scratching our hair. In any of those cases, that would require us to need another Netilas Yadayim, another washing of our hands before eating bread, and therefore now we can wash our hands again, say a blessing of thank you Hashem for this mitzvah of washing our hands, and then sit down to have our bread meal. Paragraph 16. Let's say during the meal somebody scratches or touches a part of their body which is normally covered. So in this case as well, they have to do another Netilas Yadayim. They have to wash their hands again, because that in temple times that would have had the potential of making them ritually impure, and therefore just like then they would have had to wash their hands again to continue eating. So to nowadays we wash our hands to continue eating. This includes any part of the body which is normally covered. It could be upper arms, it could be our legs, it could also be scratching our head when we end up touching our scalp by scratching our head. That also would necessitate another Netilas Yadayim, another hand washing in the middle of a meal. Of course, if someone goes to the bathroom, they'd have to wash their hands as well before continuing the meal. But with all these hand washings in the middle of the meal, we don't recite a blessing on it. Paragraph 17. The Kitzur Shulchan Aruch mentions a very strong custom that people used to have to wash their hands before eating any sort of fruit. Any sort of fruit they eat with your hands, grapes for example, that's something most people don't eat with a fork and knife. You hold it, take each grape with your hand and pop it into your mouth. So there used to be a custom, there were opinions that you had to wash your hands before eating grapes, the same way you wash your hands for bread. However, practically speaking, that's not the custom nowadays. If somebody wants to do it, that's of course wonderful, but the standard custom is to not worry about those grapes or eating fruits with our hands. We do not have to wash our hands beforehand. Now, even those that have that custom, this only applies for technical halachic reasons about how ritual impurity passes from one item to the next. It only applies if those grapes that we're eating are wet. So if somebody rinses the grapes or washes the grapes, they would have to worry about washing the hands first. However, if the grapes are totally dry, then everyone agrees you don't have to wash your hands first. So if you're not washing your grapes or rinsing grapes before eating them, there's no place at all for having to worry about washing your hands. Paragraph 18. According to that custom that says you have to worry about the grapes being wet, in that case you do have to wash your hands, then being wet with what? Is it water? Is it other liquids? So there are 7 liquids that we're concerned about. There's wine and wine vinegar. That's considered 1. Number 2 is honey from bees. Number 3 is olive oil. Number 4 is milk. This would include whey, some sort of liquidy byproduct of making cheese. Number 5 is dew. Number 6 is blood of an animal. And number 7 is, of course, water. Fruit juice would not be a problem. If grapes got wet from fruit juice, then nobody says you have to wash your hands before eating it. And again, all this is only according to that one opinion, that one custom of washing our hands before eating wet grapes, wet fruit that are eaten with our hands. But like I mentioned in last paragraph, the standard custom nowadays is not to be concerned with that, and therefore even eating wet fruit, wet grapes, etc. would not require us to wash our hands first, regardless of what liquid they became wet with. The next 3 paragraphs, paragraph 19, 20, and 21, discuss more scenarios of what's considered making something wet, what types of liquids have the ability to make it wet that would require you to wash your hands. But like I've been saying, since the custom nowadays is that for wet fruit we don't wash our hands, we're not going to go into details of those paragraphs. So this concludes today's learning. Have a wonderful day and see you tomorrow.